Like electricity, artificial intelligence is expected to transform every business and every part of our lives. AI could revolutionize medicine and manufacturing, finance and farming, logistics and leisure. It could solve complex problems like climate change and cybersecurity. And in the process, it's estimated that artificial intelligence will add $15 trillion to the global economy by 2030. AI allows machines to imitate human intelligence by filtering vast amounts of data to find patterns and connections. You're using AI when an app redirects you around a traffic jam, or locates the closest coffee shop, or tags a photo, or translates a foreign phrase. In the process, you are also enabling AI. When you shop, search, or share, you are creating some of the data which will be used to refine its calculations and more accurately predict your behavior and preferences. And these are early days. With a boom in processing power and an explosion of available data, AI will make major leaps in the years ahead, giving computers the ability to learn from experience and potentially make decisions without human intervention. These machines will empower us. Some worry they could also endanger us. There are ethical questions. Are the data sets used to create AI biased against women and minorities? Should you have more power to control what data is collected about you, how it's used, and how long it is retained? There are economic questions. Will everyone share the benefits of these new technologies? And what will happen to workers whose jobs become obsolete? And there is an existential question. Will the machines outsmart us?
I think that's a great video to kick off this session, and we're going to take it to the next level. We have 3 women who are experts in this field that you're going to hear from. And I want to start off by just telling you a little bit about who you're going to hear from. First is Robin Benfei. Robin is a native of Georgia and a Georgia Tech graduate. I knew Robin when she was in charge of AT&T's engineering. Worldwide, she was in charge of it. She was also in charge of Bell Labs. She was then the CIO of BlackBerry and was recruited away by Samsung, and she was the CIO of Samsung. And there she was promoted as the head of enterprise innovation for the entire organization. And she's still an advisor to them. Presently, she is the founder and CEO for Innovate, where she's built a technology accelerator to help technology companies flourish. And we were talking earlier, there are 90 companies that have come through that process here in Atlanta. Robin has 15 patents to her credit, and she is one of the, yeah, absolutely. Actually, I stand corrected, it's now 16
yeah, I wrote
patents.
one when I was on my back waiting for back surgery last year. Got to do something with your brain.
And she is one of the founders of Valor Ventures, which is the first ever all-female founded venture fund here in the Southeast. She's on the board of Mitsubishi Finance and was recently named by Inc. magazine as one of the 18 women to watch. And we are certainly going to be doing that today. Janet Walker Ford has a bachelor's degree in Management Information Systems from the University of Memphis. She has a master's in Business Administration from Central Michigan and is working on her doctorate in Information Systems at Nova Southeast University. I first met Janet when she was in Atlanta, living in Atlanta at the time, and she was the CIO for MARTA, where she led the Breeze Card program, which was the first ever smart card fare payment system in the United States. And so, we thank you for that, Janet. She was named CIO of the Year for her work by the Georgia CIO Leadership Association, and she was then promoted to the Deputy CEO at MARTA. She has had senior roles at Parsons, Booz Allen Hamilton, Cubic Corporation, and is presently with AECOM, which is the world's largest integrated design and construction firm in the world, and she was recently appointed as their Senior Vice President for Transportation. She is also an award-winning technology executive with as I said, extensive experience in transportation, was recently recognized at the National Women of Color STEM Conference with their industry award, and MIT and TDC have recognized her with their Service to the Transportation Industry Award. Next is Deborah Lamb. Deborah is a graduate of Georgetown University and the University of California, Berkeley, and she's presently serving as the Managing Director of Smart Cities and Inclusive Innovation at Georgia Tech. And she comes at artificial intelligence from a little bit different perspective from our other two speakers. It's a perspective that's going to impact all of us in the room. It's going to be fascinating to hear her talk about how cities are transforming themselves through the application of this technology. And she actually founded the Georgia Smart Community Challenge, which is the first ever statewide effort to empower communities to become smarter. Prior to this, she was Pittsburgh's first ever Chief of Innovation Performance and also worked as a management consultant with Arup, a global engineering design firm. She too has won numerous awards, including 100 Most Influential People in Digital Government. She serves on the boards of Metro Lab Network and Neighborhood Nexus. She's a graduate of both Leadership Atlanta and Leadership Atlanta. I can't think of a better dream team to talk to us about this subject, but I'm actually going to get all of you to participate along with us. I'm going to ask you all a question first and ask you to respond to it, and then I'll ask our panelists to follow up. And the first thing I want to ask, and I expect everybody to raise a hand and y'all to do the neighborhood nudge if your neighbor's not raising their hand. And I want to ask our audience this question. How many of you think artificial intelligence is the most exciting thing happening in the world right now? Okay, there are only a few hands. We need to do some of this nudge. All right, how many of you think that this is the scariest thing happening? Anybody think it's scary? All right, there's no right or wrong answer here. Even Stephen Hawking in that video, you notice, didn't answer that question. All right, and how many of you don't know how to answer that question, one way or the other? Okay, well that's sort of what we're hoping we're going to accomplish today, is give you a little bit better idea of whether you should be afraid or excited. And so my first question of the panelists is I want to hear you talk a little bit about some of the exciting things that you are working on and sort of your perspective on where you think all this is going to take us. Robin, you want to kick us off?
Sure. When I hear people talk about AI, I think to myself in the back of my head, that's so 1998. Why are we having that conversation? And the reason I say that is one of my patents is actually written in Rules You Build Yourself, my Ruby Ring. And the tickets that went through your network that actually solved your problems and put your service back up actually fixed everything and then signed the ticket Ruby. So I used to have guys call us and say, can you thank Ruby for us for doing this? And they thought it was a woman that was working in the service department. And so it eliminated 20,000 people's jobs here in the United States back in 2002. So, but those 20,000 people that lost their jobs were ready to be retired. They were in positions that they were not very happy with. So when I think about where we are today, some of the things and the challenges we have to say is, yeah, I was involved in that. And I think Becky has mentioned maybe in some of her other paperworks and stuff that she's done, we think of AI as a guy, not as a woman. And Ruby sounds like a woman's name, right? And Watson, who's IBM's, is a man's name. So as we think about this, we have to think about how all of our data is being acquired by us. Even our faces, our photos, our families, our DNA. How many of you guys have done the Ancestry.com or the, what is the other one? The 23andMe. You have just given away your whole family's DNA tree. And guess what? They're selling it to farmers for millions of dollars, to pharmaceuticals. Did they give you any money for your DNA? So some of the entrepreneurs that I work with believe that your DNA belongs to you and that your DNA has value and that you should be compensated for your DNA and you should be putting it in a bank so that you can actually get cryptocurrency from that. So that's just one of the things I'm involved in today.
Okay. Janet?
Thank you. Gosh, there's so much to unpack, as they say, as it relates to what's happening in AI. And though you may not recognize what that means, you're all experiencing it every single day. As mentioned, if I think about transportation, which is the industry that I represent, AI is prevalent and critical to our future. So whether it's how many of you use Clear in the airport to get through at Hartsville, Atlanta? So that's just one area. And I think this will be a great linkage to smart cities. But you think about smart cities and how we talked about really implementing that in our home cities. Columbus obviously won the grant for smart cities implementation. Something called Mobility as a Service, or MaaS, for those of you that are familiar with that. What that means is, how do you provide connections for different types of transportation modes into one platform? So you ride MARTA, you might take an Uber, you may take a Lyft, you may take, if we had ferries here, we take a ferry, but you've got a lot of different choices. What we don't have is a way of putting that into an integrated platform so that you know, based on your app, how long is it going to take me to get there, regardless of whether I walk part of the way, I take a bike part of the way, or I take public transportation, or I drive part of the way. What does that look like? So what MaaS does is really start approaching smart cities in terms of implementation and getting public and private sector to be integrated into one app. So imagine this. You're able to walk into a subway station, into an airport, and the token is you. It's your optical, your identification. And that technology exists today. It's the political, the governance, and the ethics pieces of it that we're still working on. But the ability to provide an integrated platform that will ease your travel pattern is really what we're after. I know many of you are sick of being stuck on 85 and 285, but imagine if you had enough intelligence that came to you when you woke up in the morning that understands what your traffic pattern is. It's looked at your calendar, where you need to be that day. Are you going to the airport or downtown? And able to give you your options for that trip, or say, hey, Becky, you might want to wait an hour because there's an accident on 85 and you'll get there at the same time if you wait. Or how about if you go a different route, or you take public transportation? Being able to have a platform that allows you to see that scheduling information real time, an integrated view, how much it's going to cost me and how long will it take will be critical. And there's certainly a lot more that I can get into, but that's the overall picture that I'm really excited about, that will make our lives easier and provide a better quality of life once we can get out of some of this congestion.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to those self-driving cars where I don't even have to do the driving.
Exactly.
I can read my paper and drink my coffee on the way.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Deborah, you want to tell us how this is going to impact our cities?
I think you're right. I'm approaching this a little bit differently. And first of all, I'd like to thank you for inviting me to this. And I'm actually a little bit humbled and overwhelmed by the previous panelists in terms of just the amazing work that you've been able to do around human trafficking and free healthcare. But I was thinking to myself, how do we follow such magnitude of topics with AI, and how does it connect? is kind of my first. But then actually your question made it sink into me, and in a sense that actually AI is a tool to address many of the world's and locals' most wicked, complex problems. And so you think of any problem that you have, and there are many of them that we just heard of, whether it is human trafficking or healthcare, and you think of your toolkit of things to address it. Whether it's policy, regulatory, business models, societal. AI is one of these additional tools that empower you to address these problems. That's fundamentally how we look at it, and that's how we stand here or sit here today. And it's really a way to allow us to address these problems, and really a means to do that. And that's what's so exciting right now. So never before, these problems that we've faced, we've always faced them, right? And to a certain extent, they've gotten more complex, they've increased in scale, they've gotten more frequent in terms of severity, etc. But it's very exciting for us because for the first time, we're given a set of tools like AI that lowers the barrier, that becomes more accessible, that allows us to address some of these problems with better decision making, with better ways to access it, with better service. And I think that's the connection that we all face. And that's really exciting. And I think it's not perfect. But I think we're all trying to use this as part of our wider toolkit. And so Jenna talked really well, like one of the major problems with transportation is accessibility, right? It's very hard to get from point A to point B in a way that's convenient, accessible, that allows you to have choice. And so AI allows you to increase your choices in terms of trying to get to mobility. And also what was said before about data, how you capture that data, especially your data. We're now discovering different ways to monetize that and to empower individuals to understand that data to make better decisions. So think of each of the problems and barriers that you face, and think about AI as just one of the tools that allow you to address that collectively.
Great. Okay, get those elbows ready because I'm getting ready to ask the second question. And the second question is, how many of you think that we are going to see an increase in the net new jobs from this technology? How many think we'll see a net increase? All right, well, according to Forbes, those of you that raised your hands are correct. Forbes says that there will be 58 million net new jobs created in this space between now and the year 2022. That's only 2 years from now. Really, it's less than 2 years from now. And of course, those jobs aren't all going to be created in the United States. They'll be created globally. But of the 133 million jobs created, there will be 75 million eliminated. And so there'll be a tremendous need for corporations and others to upskill the current workforce that we have. So how do we ensure, as women, that more of these jobs go to women? Because if you look at the state of things today in the United States and around the world, it's not a very pretty picture. And it didn't start out that way. The term computer was first coined right after World War II. And in World War II, computer, that term was a job description, just like doctor or janitor or accountant. A computer was somebody that took large amounts of data and calculated it. And guess who held the majority of those jobs? Women. But something has happened over the years, and if you look at the marketplace today in the United States, only 20% of computer science jobs in this country are held by women. And the pipeline looks pretty bleak too. 18% of the people enrolled in college today in computer science are women. And if you look at that number and look at minority women, the numbers are even worse. Of the 18% that minorities make up in the computer science field, only 4% are women of color. So we've got some work to do. If you look worldwide at what these numbers look like, the place they look the best, interestingly enough, is Eastern Europe, countries like Luxembourg and Romania. And they say the reason for that is that those countries were under a communist regime. And under the communist regime, it was mandatory that women work. And the computer science field was a lot less risky than being in the humanities, where they really didn't have a lot of free voice. I thought that was just a fascinating thing. And today, 52% of the computer science workforce in Eastern Europe is made up of women. In India, 52% of the computer science majors currently are women, but yet when they get into the workforce, only 30% of their workforce is women. And women tend to hold the lower jobs at the bottom. What's worse is that when women do enter the tech field, they leave the jobs at 45%. They're 45% more likely to leave their job than a man. Men do leave, but they only leave at a rate of 17%. And if you look at patents in the field, 88% of patents in the tech field are to male-only teams, and only 2% are to women. All the more reason this woman is really remarkable right here. And yet, these are the fastest growing and some of the highest paid jobs out there. And my real concern too is for women in developing countries who don't have technical tools, they don't even have access to the internet. So I want to ask you, our panelists, to give us some ideas, give us your insights on what you think we need to do to try to get more women excited about going into this interesting field.
So I'll start us off with, I kind of believe in the power of one, and the one person can do multiple things or reach out and support other people. And Becky, a long time ago, said something to me. She says, Robin, you have to get out more so that people can hear what you do and see what you do. And I came back from working with Samsung, and I was the highest executive in Samsung globally. All three of my jobs are global jobs, international jobs. And I work with the chief executive officer for Samsung, and he's over electronics. It's a $330 billion business. It's 500,000 employees, and there's 50,000 of us that are foreigners. That's what we're considered, foreigners, if we're not Korean. And so I work with the top guy, and I'm a gal. And a lot of people, when they saw me in the room, didn't really understand, but I'm in there designing with him, right? And he never once had a moment in his mind where I was a woman that walked in the room. It's about 6 hours after we're drawing on his glass wall, I say to him, I'm gonna fall over because I'm hungry. You have to feed me at some point in time. So we go off and we work. But Becky said something to me when I came back from an event. I was out in Silicon Valley. I was watching 97 companies come across the stage of the new entrepreneurs that are out kind of breaking glass. And out of the 97, only were 3 women companies. And I thought, how can that be? 30-something years. You know, I was in engineering school 35-something years ago. Yes, there was only me in the class and maybe one other. When I got my master's, there was only 9 of us at Georgia Tech out of the 42 people in the class. And here it is, so many years later, I go and I see the top talent in entrepreneurs that are breaking glass in this space. And only 3 of them are women companies, women-led. And every other one was full male teams. And I came back and Becky says to me, I love it when Becky pokes me. She says, so go put your money where your mouth is. It's like, okay. So I decided I'm gonna pivot out of my corporate job. I'm gonna start my own innovation center up the street, and I'm gonna join a VC fund. And she pointed me to somebody that was founding a VC fund that is woman-led. And we have a program called Startup Runway for women and minorities that are trying to get into breaking the glass in this space. We work with women who code. We work with a lot of women organizations, but we are here to be inclusive because it takes both sides of us to take something forward. So I'm trying in my own way, in my own power to do that. And I just, anybody wants to come visit me at Atlanta Tech Park, we're just up the street. And as Becky said, we've got 90 plus companies in tech acceleration. And I really embrace those that have inclusive teams. The McKinsey study that just came out, you will improve your profits and your output and your employee happiness by 33 to almost 40% if you have a diverse team in all aspects. So we should be doing that.
I'm glad to know somebody actually listens to something I have to say. I always tell people it's hard to be something you've never seen.
Like I gotta go home and
so
do this
many of
because
you
Becky
are
said so.
blazing the trail for other young women. And so I know as I was coming up the corporate ladder, I was always in awe when I saw a woman in leadership. And so you can never underestimate how important that is. So thank you for listening to me on that, Robin.
And I'll add to that. I think that's a great story. But can we talk candidly? Is it just us?
Yes.
So we're in 2020, and we still are talking about the first, the only, whether it's a board role or whether it's corporate America, not-for-profit. I'm tired of being the first, aren't you? Yeah. Are the only? I think that, and I love Atlanta. I was fortunate, blessed to call Atlanta home for 20 years until about 4 years ago, and know many of you in the room. And I know a lot about the work that many of you are doing in your organizations, your for-profit and nonprofit organizations. So whether it's IWF, whether it's the National Black MBA Association, whether it's the Women in Technology, WIT, that we spend a lot of time with. They're all doing great things to create that pipeline and develop the mentor and developing those proteges and starting with elementary school and all the things that we're trying to do to ensure that we grab those young girls and minorities There's a significant gap with minorities and girls, as we all know. And getting them early on, it's all the things that we already know, but continuing, we can't let up the gas on this. Continuing to reach them early, expose them to educational opportunities and an understanding of how to connect that to a real career, something they can touch and feel. And I think the more that we can do that, working with the school system, helping create curriculums. For example, we know that, and I was involved in Philadelphia with their international airport there a few years ago, and we knew that that airport was rebuilding itself at a period of time. And if we today talk about the readiness of the workforce, that sixth grader, that seventh grader could really, from that neighborhood, go have an opportunity tied to engineering, tied to, there's not just, there's STEM jobs, but there's also blue collar jobs. There's all kinds of opportunities that you can really connect that young person to a career. What does it take though? It takes that continual feeding, pointing them in the right direction, whether it's trade school, whether it's higher ed. We would want people to achieve the highest level of educational attainment, but you've got to meet folks where they are, and you've got to have an opportunity for them to see and touch us, which we've reflected on, and they have to see that role model. As we know, many of them and their parents don't have that today. There's so many needs that our community has that we have to serve, but starting to make sure that we are able to take that child and continue to follow them, nurture them all the way through high school, all the way through college, and into the workplace and beyond, because we know that for those who do make it, they oftentimes will get into the workplace for a STEM career and decide to go do something else. And we know, why is that? We see the numbers, we saw a lot of the numbers today, and I would say, to keep this short, a large part of it has to do with the network, the kitchen cabinets, the relationships, the executive sponsors, the team that we have around us, and the relationships women have in the workplace is very different from the relationships men have. And you sit and you think about it all the time, and they are doing things. I mean, obviously we saw something about 7 years more women are spending with household chores. Well, while we're doing that, they're off on the golf course, they're out doing other things, but those relationships though really feed into their careers and career development. So we have to be very conscious about when we do get to those roles and we're bringing folks along and we're being the executive champion for the person that's not in the room and the sponsor, and making sure women have an opportunity, like Becky made sure I could be here with you today. We have to do those things to make sure that we are bringing others along and that we're helping be successful once you do get in those roles, because it can be very lonely. So that's just a little bit of my thoughts, and I'm sure there's much more to say there, but I think it's a challenge that we all have to own and continue to do our part to make a difference.
And we need to be very mindful on this thing. Just to emphasize something that you brought out, I'm tired of hearing and being the only person in the room. And I think you all should be tired of that. So that's when I talk about the power of one. Each one of us has an opportunity to promote that woman into that next job or give that woman a chance. We women do not support each other like the guys do. We don't promote each other. We're so worried about our own space and our own competencies, we don't do enough to push that other person ahead of us. And we've got to really, really start and get that buddy system going. I heard of a great job. Guess what? I know 3 women who could fill that job. Go get them on the line and put them in that job. And so we've got to just start making it happen.
Deborah, you got anything you want to add on this?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I agree very much, but also I think it's important to think about the broader infrastructure support for women that's missing. So, the Melinda Gates quote is great, but there's so much more beyond just the household work. So at the end of the day, we're talking about childcare. We're talking about elder care as you get older and you have to, take care of your parents. Most of that still falls on women. And so until we provide more infrastructure support, we can apply for those jobs and we can try to succeed at the jobs, but the dynamic of those jobs make it very hard for us to fulfill all our other responsibilities. So if you think about a partner at a law firm or a consultancy or any accounting firm, it's about billability and the number of hours that you need to get and the number of clients that you have to. That's time. If you think about an academic job, when you're trying to get tenure and you have to publish or perish and you have to teach and do service, that's a lot of time. And you think about any of these other, the VC, you know, trying to get VC capital, trying to travel all over the world, globally, nationally. That's a lot of time. So the structure to set up the promotion milestones are very traditionally oriented towards the time that you have to invest in order to hit those milestones. And when you have to deal with other things that are just as important and just as valuable, how do you manage that when that promotion targets are very traditionally based?
See, I think that's where technology is going to really help, and AI is going to be a big differentiator for us. Because even in my early days, if I didn't have that mobile phone, I couldn't have been doing my job all over the world. I couldn't have talked to my kid at night, you know, when I wanted to tuck them into bed or be on a video call and all that other type of stuff. But I really think our workforce has to shift in that woman, to be and engaged, has to have the technology at their fingertips. And that it's not about clocking hours.
Right. So
it's about mental depth and capability.
It's about changing the way that we play this game.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
yes.
the way that the game is oriented is very male oriented. And so we as the collective group need to change the way we think about success, delivery, promotion, and then once we change that language of discussion, like you can do your job without being in the office.
Correct.
From 9 to 6 at a certain point, because at the end of the day, you get the job done.
I was cooking a turkey when we had a cable outage due to an earthquake in Japan.
Right, and so it's
And I handled the whole thing with it in my ear, and that turkey was fine.
it's that recognition that you're not necessarily doing the business deal on a golf course.
Correct.
Right, and you're changing the field of success and changing the dynamic of that conversation. At the same time, pushing for more infrastructure support.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. Yeah.
So you have to say it's not just you being flexible,
Exactly.
but really demanding that, you know, we get that maternity leave, paternity leave, demanding that we get those elder care, you know, infrastructure systems that allow us to do the proper services. And we are not advocating enough of that support within our businesses and within our environment. And it really, and it goes.
I think this is worth talking about. You're spot on. Like my daughter is here today, and thanks for coming to support me. But you know, I think about how we have changed, and the workforce is more automated. And I have a global role. I can really be anywhere, unless there's times, most of us, right, where we have to be in the office. It's just right now with the coronavirus, we're being told. I don't know. Our CEO sent out a memo yesterday that said we are not to travel to this meeting next week in Los Angeles. We're going to use Teams and WebEx and that sort of thing to get it done. Well, we can really do that today. We all know about what's missing in terms of the personal interaction, but that does change the scorecard, if you will, the chess game as it relates to whether or not you have to be in the office and where you have to do a conference call. But when my daughter and my son were small, I really had to delay my career ambitions, right, until they were off in college, because I do travel a lot. I couldn't have done that when they were in high school and college, or just early parts of college. So I delayed my earning opportunity, my promotion opportunity, because I had to, or I made that choice, right? And so women are still today, every day, playing catch up for those decisions that we made consciously and happily, but we did. And so, most men, a lot of men are staying at home and we're doing non-traditional roles, but typically it rests with the woman to make sure those pieces are all sewn up. And so we're not only behind, not only do we not get paid in an equitable manner, we're playing catch up after we've either delayed or left the workforce and come back. And you know what? We still win.
You know, it's interesting. I was thinking about when we were kicking this session off that this year, 2020, is 100 years that we have had the right to vote. 100 years this year on August the 18th. And yet here we are still talking about being the only woman in the room. And as a CIO, I used to think about, gosh, technology is going to do so much to set us all free. And in fact, it has. I used to think that was a big part of my job is for me to build the infrastructure in the company so people could telecommute. But here's the thing, and this is the next question I want to ask all of you. Are you worried about gender bias and all this artificial intelligence? How many? How many of you are worried about it? Okay, well, let me just tell you, I didn't think a whole lot about this until I was asked by Roxanne to moderate this panel. And then I started reading up. Molly Burke's my next door neighbor. She gave me a book called Weapons of Math Destruction, which will frighten you to death about the bias that's being created in a lot of these tools. And if you think about it, and Robin mentioned this briefly, the personal assistants are called Siri, Bixby, Alexa. Those are female names. And then you think about the Genius machines. They're called Watson, they're called Bart, they're called Hal. And you know why? Because it's the guys that are developing this stuff.
Well,
and so,
by the way, was I was trying to get Alexa to turn off, and you started shouting at it. And I said, well, that's why they named her a woman. We can't shout at men.
well, the other thing that I did, just playing around with this, is I went into Google search and I put in photos of CEOs because I wanted to see what it would bring back. And I only looked at the first 100 photographs. And guess what? In those first 100 photographs, you know how many women were in there? 4. There were 4 women out of the 100. No women of color. They're all white women. And then I looked at minorities, there were 15 minority males. So they were doing a little bit better. But if we are not really careful with the way these tools are developed, because they're being developed by these white males, I think there's a real danger in the fact that discrimination will continue to be fostered in this environment. So I'd like to hear the 3 of you speak to this.
Yeah, I'll start with it. You're spot on. And you know, if you were to do a Google, and you have to do that now, but to do a Google on grandma, this is one of the studies that were being done. It comes back with a white older lady. And that is the image of a grandmother. If you do a search on doctor for images, you're going to see men. You do a search on nurses, you're going to see women in terms of the stereotype and biases built into some of the tools. With AI, we can talk about the criminal justice system as an example. And today, based on the scoring mechanisms for, and I'll come back to criminal justice. Let me go to something that that we may all be dealing with, hopefully not criminal justice. A bank loan, a mortgage, a car loan, increased line of credit. Those things, there's AI algorithms that are used to make scores for applicants. And your zip code, even with your insurance, can be tied to the decision about whether or not you get that loan, what your interest rate is. It's the risk factor for not who you are, but where you live and maybe your surroundings. And so that is part of what's built into the tool for AI. It's huge data sets that's based on historical information that often white engineers, programmers, that's why we need more women, that's what this is about, involved with the design, are making those decisions. And so they're biased. With the criminal justice system, black men are 5 times more likely to get sentenced for the same crime, 5 times rate for the same crime as white men. And that's just based on, again, biases, scoring mechanisms, and they could, 2 men, similar crimes, the black man is 5 times more likely to get a higher sentencing, if you will, and that goes for paroles, that goes for a number of different things as it relates to biases. And, you can do a search on, there have been pictures that have put in of African American in Google. You guys may be familiar with the Google incident that happened, I'll call it an incident, where there was the facial recognition app that they put out, and images of African Americans were put into the search, and Google came back with gorilla. Gorilla. Now, why is that? It goes back to what I said about the data sets. The information that's being put in, that is being used by machine learning or by the artificial intelligence, it does it much more rapidly than a human would be. In terms of if we're reading a book, if we're doing research, this is a speed that's unbelievable. But if you only provide certain data sets or historical data sets of information, it's very hard for AI to distinguish even from a Yorkie or a muffin, those beady eyes or whatever. So, that's part of the problem and why we need more women involved, as well as diverse ethnic and cultural groups involved with the way that we're designing and programming our future.
But where I see a lot of women right now, Where I see a lot of women right now could be some of the best data scientists. We're the best at looking at data, understanding data, and getting data to play in a more objective way. But when I think about our school systems and the role models that we have around, we don't position the careers that are going to be for the future. And maybe we start that at a young age, but it's one of those things where if we don't get our girls involved, but if we don't get our boys, I have 3 boys and a husband and a male dog. So when the dish, when something's broken in the house, like we needed to repair the garbage disposal, and I had to rewire something, it was Mom. So they don't think of it as Dad's job. Dad's a sales guy. But if we're going to fix something, we need Mom. If it's the lawnmower, Mom's going to repair the lawnmower. If we're going to do this, Mom. So you almost have to start with an inclusion mindset, because if we don't, we all can understand it and see it, and I see it all the time. You're sitting in the boardroom and you see that one woman put something out on the table, and then the room goes crickets, and then all of a sudden the conversation that was happening before starts over again. And then somebody says the same thing she said 5 minutes later, and it's picked up, right? But it came out of a guy's mouth. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. So, but we see that. So I really love inclusive kind of dialogues. I spoke at the Dutch consulate the other night, and they're trying to bring more women and minorities into entrepreneurial relationships. I've told people I think that innovation left the corporation about 5 years ago. And what you see is why women don't want to stay and climb the corporate ladder is because they actually could step out of their career and be that top innovator. But out of the money that's given to a woman entrepreneur, so just think of this. So if you think of there's 40% of the entrepreneurs are men, and 60% of the entrepreneurs are men and 40% are women. 99% of the money for an entrepreneur goes to the man and the man team. So the women aren't even able to pull the capital that they need. And a lot of women are shy. They'll bootstrap things forever and be quite successful in a very small way. But what if we were able to engage them and help them build those companies up? They're their own CEO. They're building that new infrastructure that they need to operate in. And that's why you only see 4 women, because I had the conversation, Robin, you'll never be a CEO. You gotta be kidding me. I'm a CEO all the time. And so they said, you're never gonna be somebody's CEO because you've only been a CIO and you've only been a CTO and you've only been you'd have to be a COO somewhere to be the CEO. And I thought, you know what, hell, I'll show you. I'll just promote myself to be a CEO. And I'm now 3 CEOs. So we have to continue breaking those walls down ourselves, because we also individually reinforce them. Yeah. So we've got to see where we reinforce them, and at the same time, the conversation has to be inclusive. So I was at that Dutch women's event, and there was only women in the room. And I tried to invite my husband. My husband's Dutch, just to explain. And he said, "Are there only going to be women there?" I said, well, we're talking about entrepreneurial stuff, but is only women in the room? So I'm kind of like, okay, how do we get this conversation to be an inclusive conversation where we help open that up? Because there's a lot of men who will come up to me after an event like this, that men have been in the room. I have a daughter, Robin, who I would really like to see make and break in this space. How can you help me with my daughter? So we're not the only ones thinking about this. We just got to get the men to the table as well.
Okay, I got one more question now.
Sorry.
And this will be the last one. And that is, how many of you are concerned about your privacy? Raise your hand if you're concerned about your privacy. Yeah, I guess I need to raise my hand too.
Well, all of you guys that gave your DNA away, you've just forget that one.
Yeah, I guess I should just say, yeah, well, good for you. I'm glad you are. You probably should be. We were talking earlier out in the hall about there's a company called Clearview that's been in the news a lot lately. I don't know how many of you have read about Clearview, but they have gone to social media. Have all of you been on Facebook or Twitter or one of the social media? Anybody not been on social media in here? Oh, okay, all right. Well, you might be safe. You might be the only ones in the room that are safe. They have actually gone into social media, and they have the facial recognition characteristics of 3 billion people worldwide, and they are selling it to law enforcement organizations. But guess what? They just got hacked. So anyway,
So it's not safe.
let's hear what our experts have to say about this.
So, yeah, well, I think what's interesting about this is that a lot of this has to deal with understanding the details of the technology and the innovation. And I really think that it's something that we should, goes back to what we said, we need to have a seat at the table to be part of that decision making, part of that understanding. And for a lot of this new and emerging technology right now, it's still male dominated. And so that means that our views, our concerns aren't being adequately addressed. A really good example is AAA just did a study on the autonomous vehicle, right? And just asked the number of Americans who are fearful of driving an autonomous vehicle is about 71%. And this number hasn't changed the last few years. They started the study in 2016, latest study in 2019. It's kind of hovered around the same. But if you break down that 71%, it's actually 79% of the women are afraid versus 62% of men are afraid. And that fear factor is something that we need to understand better rather than just take it for granted. Why are women afraid? Well, because it goes back to what we said. Most of the autonomous vehicle companies are male dominated, from the engineers to the CEOs to the data scientists. And so when you have that concentration of a singular gender profile, it means that it's not as inclusive as including more innovation to happen, more concerns to be addressed, better understanding and making the product better application in terms of how the product is used. And so it's a lot more than just the fear of any innovation or technology. It's more about the process of how do we actually change the standards and change the way that we can utilize and harness this technology so that it is more inclusive beyond just that first stat.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think in terms of just being concerned or afraid, governance is really a key part of the data handling going forward. So having a diverse skill set, women and minorities that are involved with the programming and design, so they can make sure that those experiences that AI draws on really are holistic and don't just represent a fraction of the community. How many of you were really afraid? I assume most folks have been in an Uber or a Lyft, a ride-share type vehicle. How many of you use ride-share? Okay, great. And you remember how you felt the first time? Or I remember telling my mom I was going to get an Uber. She says, "You're going to do what?" And she didn't understand the concept. But that was a little scary in the beginning, right? About getting in a car, using the app to hail your car, and you got to figure out what their license plate number is and what kind of car it is, and do you get in the right one? Well, think about then, we've gotten comfortable with that. We're now going to get comfortable, believe it or not, with autonomous vehicles. How many of you have been to Las Vegas and been in an autonomous Uber or Lyft? Driverless Uber or Lyft. You can go do that. So next time you're in Vegas and you want to see what that's like, right now they have a driver that still sits in the seat for now, so you're not in there by yourself. But we are absolutely going that way, and this ties back to smart cities and what I started with transportation and how we're going to be connected with every mode possible. And autonomous vehicles are safer than we are in driving. They're not distracted, they're not on their cell phones, that sort of thing. So those things are going to happen, but the data piece that goes with that is something that has to be checked, has to be governed, but clearly will make a difference in the way that we use transportation and technology.
So I'll leave us with a thought if we're getting ready to wrap up. There was a study that was put out by Fidelity, I want to say it was about maybe 8 or 10 years ago, that the year 2025 there would be a shift in power. In the 2025, the shift in power is that the wealth shifts to women. Now, as you saw earlier, we heard, we can vote for things, we can do this, we can do this. It's the products we buy or choose to buy or don't buy. But at that shift, if we're smart and we know how to invest that money, or if we know how to, because we are the ones who wield the purchasing power. 99% of the companies that are marketing to us because we're the ones who help make those decisions. But if the shift of power goes to a financial, that we women are going to carry the lion's share of the wealth, then we need to be very mindful of how we come together to manage that and direct it and help the world for better. And I love to see the individuals that are standing up and doing this to help demonstrate what this looks like. Because if we don't stand up and demonstrate what it looks like, then our children and people around, or even the guys in the office, don't understand what that is. So, but that goes along with the privacy piece.
And if I can just build upon that just briefly, is that we are entering a new frontier, right? This is a brand new platform where we are no longer going to be the only ones or
Exactly.
the small percentages. But I want to urge all of us, including everyone here, is we should practice forgiveness. And I think sometimes we're too hard on ourselves, especially when we move into being the top or being innovative or being that. Not everything is going to be perfect.
Correct.
Not everything is going to end up wonderfully exceeding our expectations. And I think we collectively need to forgive ourselves a little bit more and practice that. And don't be afraid to continue moving forward, even if it's not going to be perfect, because we are moving progress and we need to forgive ourselves in that process.
Thank you. Jennifer tells me we have about 5 minutes to take questions from our audience. So who has a really juicy question for this incredible panel? Okay, we have a hand up here.
Thank you. Wonderful panel. I'm wondering if you have applied the AI type of reasoning to the coronavirus threat that we're all hearing, and if so, if you have any takeaways to share, and let us know, is the CDC and our other organizations using any AI as they build out their models and assess the risks?
So I believe the CDC does, because I know their CTO. I don't know what they're doing with coronavirus. The only thing I can say is, I guess I'm not so scared, maybe other people should be, but the flu killed, 18,000 people here in the United States last year? So the flu is really, and coronavirus is just another thing of the flu. So good hygiene, let's not cough on each other. If we're sick, stay home. I mean, AI doesn't probably need to tell us to do that. However, I'm hearing things like in Russia, because my husband's getting ready to fly to Russia, is they're already using some facial recognition of people on the train that are Asian. And they're pulling them off the trains. And so when you hear that kind of profiling happens in all kinds of ways. I even saw a gentleman yesterday at the CVS. He was wanting a mask. He was an Asian professor. And I asked him, I said, I've got some at the house if you want one. And he says, I just need to wear it so that when I'm in class talking to my students, they think I'm being precautious because I'm Asian. Because all of this is about China. And he's Korean, but a lot of us don't know a Korean versus a Chinese versus, and so we have to open our minds up a lot in this space, because it's not going to be China that infects us, it's Italy. And I look Italian. So I hope y'all don't want to not hug me, because I would hug everybody in the room.
That's when you give them the elbow.
I give you the elbow.
Okay.
But go ahead.
We got time for one more.
Good afternoon. Great job on the panel. With AI, the reality, we talk about job displacement. I was in a conversation recently this year. The United Nations had their first, outside of New York, civil society conference in Salt Lake City. And several of the discussions were about AI and its effect on what we would call women in rural areas or emerging developing nations. So fast forward a couple of weeks ago, I was speaking with someone who says, oh yeah, my friend was in Detroit and it was 100 of them in this factory and now there's like 6 of them and all they do is sit and kind of watch the machines do their jobs. And so the question, I think, was alluded to on the panel, from an ethical perspective, what happens to those persons who are working? Work is a part of who we are, right? It doesn't completely define us, but for the woman who's in these factories that we have to work on the conditions, if you lay off 100 of them, they go home to children, 3, 4, 5, how is she to sustain herself, even though we have the good technology that is allowing us to do other things? So what is that reality? I think if you could address that as well, I think that might have addressed why your question was in so many hands of how we're excited about AI, because we know these people who've lost their jobs to some of the conveniences that we do enjoy.
So that really, thank you for your question. That really speaks to automation, and we can look back over the years and think about things that have, or careers or jobs that have been automated. Let's go just think about the computer. Becky mentioned in my introduction the first all smart card Breeze system here in Atlanta that I was fortunate enough to be in charge of. That is so dated now. We're not doing all smart cards. You know what we're doing? And I'll come back to job loss. We're paying for it with whatever we want to pay for it, with whatever apps on our phone, whatever's in our wallet, the retail model. And frankly, that's going to be the way that we pay for things. Anything, any consumer product will be based on our preference. But when that automation happened, we went from a turnstile, for those of you who know what that is, you remember you'd walk through that little thing that you, right? And tokens, if you remember back when they had tokens, that's the way that you used to pay to ride MARTA. Now, and then we moved to a smart card with something you tap and then the gate would open, you walk through. Now we have smartphones and apps that allow you to pay. And then I talked about the optical recognition that you'll see. Well, with that, someone used to do those jobs. So let's go back to that turnstile and that token. Someone would go in and grab that money and move the money around. So when that happened, we had a significant impact on the workforce that that's all they knew how to do. So we had to think about, in that instance, how do we take those folks and retrain them, right? Or, kind of redeploy them in other careers, other technical careers. Some of them were, you could train them to do other things, and others we just really had to think about something else. So I believe sincerely that the key to this for women particularly, and I always say minorities, is that we know it's happening. Why are we waiting? So developing that skill set right now for the current workforce, and then for those that are coming up, the girls and young women, we have to make sure that they're looking 20, 30 years out, and that we're giving them a skill set that's going to make them relevant. But I do think that if we focus on that, it will significantly make a difference. In 2025, 2026, we're going to see a different demographic for the college graduate.
Yes.
You guys have been studying that, and part of it has to do with the economic downturn that we had. So people stopped having babies 20 years ago. So my math. 10 years ago. So that 18-year-old that's going to start coming out of school soon, and I sit on the board of trustees for a college, and we're looking at how do we remain competitive with college student and recruiting. Well, most of those students are now going to be Hispanic and African American. The scale will tilt because white parents stopped having children during that downturn, and some demographics did not. So in order for, and it's Jacksonville University, it's predominantly white college demographics, they've got to go out, and they should have been doing it all the time, but they've got to go out and start reaching students in a different way, and they need to start early, and I'm excited about that work, but it ties to AI though. It ties to the technology jobs that are coming in the future, and how we make sure that we're positioning folks not for, you go to this job at Caterpillar and you're doing that same thing for the next 30 years. Now you have to continue to evolve, and to me, do lifelong learning.
And the gig economy is going to make you not just do one job, you'll be doing 5 or 6 jobs all at one time.
All right, we are out of time, but I want to close this session out by doing something called a rapid fire, and I'm going to ask each one of you to use one word to describe what you think is going to be coming our way in the way of artificial intelligence. So what one word would you say, Robin?
Oh gosh, one word.
One word to describe.
I'm a wordy person.
Anybody else want to go first?
Curiosity.
Okay.
Convenience.
People.
All right. Well, will you please join me in giving them a round of applause? They do a great job.